Yeah, thank you for that introduction. So that's a second Minnesota grad here that you have in front of you, right? So you may know that the definition of an expert is one who travels far. Well, I traveled for 10 minutes this afternoon, so I don't know what that tells me about the talk that I have today. Perhaps not a lot of science, but I want to give you, take you some ideas and some economics that we've done and thinking about when it comes to making decision makings regarding to beef on dairy at the farm. Let's see. Yeah, okay. And so what I want to do, I want to get started with taking you through our implementation of beef on dairy at the UF dairy farm. We started that about a year ago, a little bit of the prep work we did, a little bit of the results we had. Then I need to talk about heifer inventory control. How many heifers do we actually want to make with sex semen first? Then I'm going to share a little bit about some ideas of what determines the calf value, what are impacts of beef or dairy semen on the cow, and also a little bit on the effect of fertility differences. So we cannot only talk about genetics, there are additional factors that play a role. And then in blue, that is, I highlighted blue because it's a little bit of out of the box thinking, a little bit of experimental, where do I think these decision making is going. So if you allow me to do that here. So yeah, I mean, I'm talking to the hometown crowd, at least if you're in Gainesville here, right? So the UF Dairy unit here, and late in 23, we had an opportunity to do a few things different, and one of those things is that could we do differently is implement a beef on dairy program. So this is basically what we did before we implemented a more strategic beef on dairy program. Not that we were not doing anything, we were doing something, okay? And so here, this is our Thursday breeding sheet here. We breed about 22, 25 cows every Thursday here. And the manager would write S, as you could see that there, if he thought we're putting sex semen on those animals, and he would write B if he said let's breed them with beef. Mostly determined by, we need to get the cow pregnant, and maybe a beef bull does a little better job in that. And if it's blank, that'd be conventional. Okay, and so that was sort of the plan, and you see the bulls then that were used in this plan here. And I think we had an opportunity to do this a little bit more strategically, okay? And so one of the results of that old plan was you get results like this. So here is breeding date here, and this is genetic merit of the cow. I hope you're familiar with net merit. Net merit is the Council of Dairy Cattle Breeding's, USDA's economic selection index. It ranks cows for profitability, if you will, genetically, okay? And so you also see that in red would be breedings to conventional dairy, S would be, blue would be to sex dairy, and then you would have some conventional beef. And basically, you see this all over the place, right? Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that we've bred some pretty low genetic animals to sex dairy semen, thinking, hey, we're getting 90% chance of getting a dairy calf out of a genetically not very good mother. And we've also had some genetically very good animals that we then just bred with conventional semen. And then we have only a 50% chance of getting a dairy calf because the bull calves we would sell anyway, right? So not very strategic if you think about this. But at the same time, this was not that many years ago. I think a lot of dairies sort of did programs like this. Well, everybody was doing, not everybody, but a lot of dairies were doing beef on dairy. And you do your homework some, and we looked at, well, what are price differences between a crossbred calf, that would be Angus on dairy, that we could sell, and a dairy bull calf. And this was at least a year ago, that was about a $300 difference. And these numbers now, $475 for the crossbred and $175 for a dairy bull calf, today they're very low, right? We're talking about $800 or so. But that spread, about $300 is still there. So everything is higher, but the spread is about the same. So clearly, why don't we make more of these to sell rather than those, right? That sort of makes sense. Okay, and so what you should do as any, I think, good dairy manager, you put a partial budget together and say, what is this new plan going to beef on dairy in the new plan compared to what we've been doing before? What does that, at least on paper, look like when we do economics? There's a lot of data here. I won't take you through all of that, but we looked at semen cost. We looked at how many calves can we sell if we move to beef and dairy, and then price differences on calves, okay? And if you do that math, the new plan would get us, semen cost would get us to maybe $150 per cow per year more. That's a lot of money, right? 150 bucks a cow per year, mostly because we're selling crossbred calves now. This ignores the value of better genetics, and I'll talk about that next, okay? So a little bit introduction. These data are a little older, but the principle is very sound still. This would be a snapshot. Every blue dot would be the genomic PTA of net merit for heifers and cows in the U of dairy herd here. These would be the heifers, these would be the cows, and this is age. And you can see if animals get older, then typically their genetics is lower because the bulls are getting better all the time, right? So the sires of these animals and also their dams were genetically better than the sires of our cows there, right? And so now I'm going to mate, at that time, this is a couple of years old, sires that are worth 900 net merits to this population of heifers and cows that I have. Right? And so if I pick a dam here, a heifer, and she has a PTA of net merit of 500, and I breed her to a sire of 900, I get an average, a parent average of 700. It's straight through the middle of there. Okay, but if I breed this dam here, who has a PTA of net merit of minus 100, and I breed her to a sire of 900, I get a calf parent average of $400. So I'm looking at $700 versus $400 PTA net merit differences. Now the question is, what is that worth, right? And so the math is not that difficult, but maybe not everybody thinks about it this way. So the $300 difference from those two scenarios that I just showed you there is the difference in the offspring over a lifetime being about three years here. But the PTA is always what is transmitted to the next generation. And that made sense because the PTAs, you know, when we selected bulls, we're really interested in the daughters of the bulls, right? So it makes sense, what do the bulls transmit to the next generation? But in this case, we're looking at PTAs of calves. And so we're not really that interested yet in the daughters of the calves. We're primarily interested in these calves being cows themselves. All right, and now we shouldn't really look at PTAs, we should look at estimated breeding values, the animal itself, not what she transmits, which is half. And then to get from PTAs to estimated breeding values, you just have to multiply by 2. So really those two differences in calves are really worth $600 difference, right? The one calf versus the other. And that is over about a 3-year lifetime. And so if I divide that by 3 years, I get to 200 estimated breeding value per year, or about $200 per cow per year that the calf out of the heifer is worth out of that calf out of the cow. So big differences, right? So we better pay attention to that. Okay, and so what that means then, why don't we try to make more dairy heifer calves, of course, out of our better heifers and our better cows as well. Next, we had to figure out, okay, we're going to use now sexed semen, and I'm going to show you later on which animals we use that, and we use net merit to some extent. We need to go through some math on how many heifers do we need. And there's a lot of small numbers in here. You may not be able to see it all on the end, but this is a calculator here. If we had 500 cows here, that means, and if we had a 35% replacement rate, we need to calf about 15 heifers a month. If we calf 15 heifers a month, on a 500 cow dairy, we get to a 35% replacement rate. But we're going to have losses down the road, okay? We're not, in this case, not making any surplus. A lot of dairies say, yeah, but there's variation in the system. I rather make some extra heifers rather than being short. You might put a buffer in there. We didn't do that in this case. Here, we had a very high non-complete rate. Non-complete rate is the time between a one-day-old calf and her being 2 years later calving, okay? Not every one-day-old calf makes it to calving, okay? And in this, based on the data we had back then, the way we raised heifers, which we've totally changed, we had about a 35% loss. You believe that? Like a very high loss of heifer calves that never made it to the herd. So we put that in. If you do that, then you need at least 22 heifer calves born alive to get to the 15 because you're going to lose 7. All right? Now this is old data. We've fortunately changed our management here. We had some dead on arrivals here, and that dumped us up to 23 heifer calves born, including dead on arrival. Then if we're using sex semen, say 90% purity, 90% females, 10% males, we're getting to about 26 calves born to sexed semen. But that includes some 10% males, okay? And so here we're at birth, and now we have 9 months to go from breeding to calving. And at that point, we thought we're going to lose another 15% from conception to calving. Cows that get culled, for example, okay, abortions. All right, and so if you add it all up, you get to about 30 new pregnancies diagnosed with sex semen, say a month after breedings. Now you have to convert that again into how many sex semen inseminations do I need on heifers and cows, and then the conception rate matters, okay? And so we, based on this math, and doing some fine-tuning, we at that point, about a year ago, we said we're going to do sex semen if she's a heifer, if she has times bred less or equal to 2, so never bred, one breeding or second breeding, and her genomic net merit, and all our heifers and cows are genomically tested. We do that as a matter of principle at the University Dairy, had to be over 650. If this was the case on heifers, she'd got sex semen. And that was about 80% of our heifers met those criteria, right? All 80% of our heifers. We also had some animals that had missing genomic data. We also bred them, at least the first breeding, to sex semen. And then cows, lactation 2 or less, times bred 0, 1, or 2. Also, if the genomic net merit was over 650, also bred to sex semen. And we would even breed some older cows, third lactation, to sex semen when they had never been bred or the first breeding. And we never bred any cows over lactation 4 or to sex semen. All right, and then the remainder, that would be about 50%, would be bred to beef semen. Because collectively, if you do the math here, we get to about the right number of pregnancies from sex semen. Okay? And so that was the goal. And so usually this works fairly well, but not always very well. All right, so we got to improve this system some. There's a few things here that I want to point out that, as you will see later, I think there's room for improvement, right? One, this is sort of if you do modeling, sort of an unpleasant mixture of lactation number, times bred, and genetics. And ideally, I'd put this all in one index, right? So I'm not that hard on lactation number or times bred, for example, all right? And we'll get to that later here. All right, and then our breeding list would look like this. This is 21 cows here, so we assign them sexed or beef based on the formula that you've seen there, okay? There's a few where it says slick. That's a little project that we do at the University Dairy. They have a very short hair. It's a Pete Hansen project. That's fine. We want to make some slick animals. We also did not mate our cows here. We could have, and maybe we should have, mated our cows and said, hey, instead of where it says sixth, it is this sexed bull. And in another case where it says sixth, it may be another sexed bull. But based on some history, we had in the past staff they could not really get that done. So this was just practical. It's beef, it's bull of the week, sexed and beef, and that basically worked flawlessly. They can do that very well here. Now I want to point out a few things here, right? So here in this column here, we have the genomic net merit of these animals here. And this was the highest one, $761. And indeed, that animal should have been bred, this animal bred to sex semen. And this animal is the lowest one, should be bred to beef, and it was bred to beef. But for the sake of argument, what if we had bred this animal here to sexed, okay? Then we would, the value of the calves would be 761 minus 344 if they were both bred to sex semen, okay? And that would be the lifetime profit differences of the daughters bred to sex semen. So that's really $470, like, that's a lot of money there that we're talking about if we're breeding the wrong cow to the wrong type of semen there. We also had this animal here, which was 802 net merit, really was the highest in the list there, but assigned to beef semen, mostly because was second lactation and had already been bred 3 times. And so a little based on history, perhaps because we thought, well, the beef semen gives a little higher conception rate, therefore let's move her to beef semen, not longer to sexed. And you wonder if that is then the right decision, right? Because this is genetically the best animal in the herd, but should we really penalize her that hard for failure to conceive? Maybe it wasn't her fault, maybe it was breeder's fault, right? So quite things there that we could improve. So after we've implemented the new program here, and this is the old program here, this is the new program here where we did sexed and conventional beef. You can see the sex is mostly, again, on our best genetics, and the conventional beef on our lower genetics here. And then you look at what is the average expected value of the calves, the dairy calves that we make out of these pregnancies here. Then in the older system, the average net merit of the dam would be $590. And in the new program here, $740. So that is rounded, there's a little bit of rounding here. That is, the new program added $151 in the PTA of the dairy calf there, right? By breeding mostly to our better genetics. And if you go through the math, that is an additional $50 per cow per year. So it's not only the value of the calves and the semen cost, it is an additional value of elevating the level of genetics here. I didn't really give credit enough to Ron Jackson from ST Genetics because none of this I've sort of thought of myself, but we've talked about these strategies together a lot. So what about heifer inventory control? And I'll start with a large dairy here. And we'll look in here. This is week of the year. In yellow here, these are the breedings. This is number here, the number of breedings that happened, and then breedings converted into dairy heifer calves. Okay, so this is the expected number of dairy heifer calves that you see here. This dairy wanted to make almost 150 dairy heifer calves every week in order to replace culled cows. These are breedings. These animals here are recently called pregnant. And then here are animals that are 8-9 months pregnant. And here are dairy heifer calves that are born. And so these are on the ground already, right? So they're all dairy heifer calves. And the plan was that we've made about 148 dairy heifer calves every week. But we did not really succeed that, right? There were times here we made way too many, and there were times there we did not make enough. And this is a several-year-old plan before we tried to be better at the logistics of making the right number of dairy heifer calves every week here. I looked at our own dairy unit data as well, and that looked like this. Here now, these are the bred animals here. These are the dairy heifer calves that are in pregnant heifers or in pregnant cows. Yeah, and now these in blue here are the heifers on the ground. okay? And our goal was here about 15, and the orange is sort of a moving average. And so on average, we've sort of stayed above our goal of 15. So we should have probably adjusted our number of sex semen breedings better, right? We have to control that. There's too much variation in here. If we really, our goal was really to hit that target there of 15. This is the number of heifers that are bred and pregnant. And this basically means we're looking at 20, at the top there, 20 heifers calving in a month, okay? And again, that goes back to we want about, we need about 15 of them, but we're looking at 20 very soon. So 5 too many. Is 5 out of 15 on a small herd, is that a big deal? Well, if you milk thousands of cows, maybe that matters, right? We ought to be better able to control supply there. And so, a better way to control that, and again, here's a calculation here. It's a little different calculation in needs than on the previous calculation here. But one way to do that here, you still have your potential assignments for lactation number times bred. But now, instead of saying, hey, my genomic net merit has to be on average 650 or so, we're going to play every week with what this threshold should be, right? So instead of 650, if 650 makes us not enough dairy heifer calves, maybe we got to lower the 650 this week. Or if we're making too many sex semen breedings, maybe that 650 has to go to 700 that week, all right? And so if you implement this, and best dairies in Florida and Georgia do this, right? You're really much better able to flatten out the number of sex semen breedings that you make. The question is a little bit, should you just do that weekly, for example? Are you over-adjusting? If you were short in number of breedings in the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, are you just over-adjusting? And there's some evidence that suggests we might over-adjust. We may have to be a little bit easier on the adjustment there. All right, some other material here. So we talk a lot about sort of the parent average so far, the average of the net merit of the sire, the net merit of the cow, and we'll just take in the average. And we don't include genomic relationships, okay? So this was a paper from 2013, I think this was, okay? And they go through a method on how to use genomic relationships between sires and cows to fine-tune matings. And we want that because we want to improve the quality of the dairy heifers that we make, right? And so basically you include the PTA of the sire and the dam. So these PTAs that you find from USDA, they are corrected for the average inbreeding to the population. Okay, so if you have a bull that is supposedly very related to the cow population, he will get a lower net merit. USDA sort of anticipates that to some extent. So the first thing the math here suggests we do then is we add back to the PTAs for net merit what the penalty that USDA subtracted from the PTAs. Okay, that's the inbreeding depression. That's about $25 per point of estimated future inbreeding for the sire and the dam, and I'll have a numerical example. And then you have to add it to that, and then from that, now the number is higher, you have to subtract the inbreeding depression of the actual relationship between that sire and that dam that you're mating to. Okay, and I'll give you an example here. So if the PTA of the sire was 950 and the dam was 500, the inbreeding depression, that's a given number from USDA, is $25. If the estimated future inbreeding from the sire was 9.2, the estimated future inbreeding from the dam was 8.1. So I have to add this to this number here. Then I subtract the $25 and say for the sake of this example here that this sire and this dam are not very related. Their actual inbreeding is only 7.5, okay, mostly unrelated in this case. If you then go through the math, Okay, then instead of an average here, adding the PTA of the sire and PTA of the dam together, so the estimated breeding value of 1450, we're really looking at doing the inbreeding adjustment. We're looking at 1695 there. So that is a jump in the value of the calf of $245, okay, by accounting for the relationship between the sire and the dam there. Yeah, so another way to think about it, that 950 sire here, that is the PTA of the sire. If you knew, hey, I'm going to breed her to this particular cow, but he's very unrelated to this cow, you could also say his PTA really would be 1195 if you knew what that relationship was, see? And this is a little bit more precision dairy, right, than just working with parent averages. So at U of Dairy, we're not doing this, but we should. And I know some dairies here do this already. I don't have any data here, but I'm quite interested in other factors that affect the calf value other than the genetic components there, okay? For example, we know this is, we look at the seasonality. We know we get heat stress in the state, that when we have conceptions or when calves are being born, depending on the heat stress of the dam, we affect future potential. So does that mean we should make dairy heifer calves in the winter here, for example, because they're less affected by heat stress if our cooling was not as strong? Perhaps, although that challenges our constant flow of dairy heifer calves through the system, right? This is old data here, but there's some evidence that if a cow gave birth to a daughter, she produces a little more milk. So depending on what the sex of the offspring is, there is an effect there. Or I think this paper goes into if the mom produces a lot of milk above and beyond the genetics, that will actually decrease future milk production of the daughter. So you don't get a full display of a literature review here, but there are additional things in addition to just the net merit, even if we adjust for relationship there, inbreeding, that help us predict the value of the calf. Okay, and you've already seen this from Tara here, but the question is then too, of course, and I won't spend much time in it, right? Does the type of the sire affect then what happens to the cow? And if you look at breeding a cow to a beef bull versus a dairy bull, basically no effect, right? It's not like, my goodness, we really mess up this dairy cow because she gave birth to a crossbred calf here. Yeah, so another thing that we have to sort of, I think, keep in consideration, that if I make a mating between a cow and a sire, I may have a high probability of conception or a low probability of conception. For example, maybe this cow had just had mastitis or had, a transition cow, and I'm getting a much lower probability of conception than average. And would that affect then what type of semen I put on the cow or the heifer, right? Because now I'm not only looking at the potential genetic value of the calf, I first have to get a calf. I need to get a pregnancy, for example. And I sort of put this together here this morning, but I have a calculator there that looks at difference in fertility, difference in genetics, and then what can I pay for example, bulls that are genetically better than another bull. Okay, and so I've played with that a little bit here. So essentially, if I had a sire here of 1200 net merit and the dam would be 700, but the mating either gets us 50% conception rate, or 40%, or 30%, then the relative value of that unit of semen with the lower conception rates drops by 25% or by $25 or by $50. So if I get a much lower conception rate, I would have to pay quite a bit less for the semen in order to sort of say, hey, I'm not losing any money compared to more expensive semen with a higher conception rate, right? And so you can turn that around, say, hey, if I'm sort of break even on my semen investment, then with this low conception rate, I really would have to breed a $1,000 net merit cow in order to, my cash flow forward, I expect the same profitability as a higher conception rate semen on the $700 cow here. The point is here that differences in fertility, whatever reasons we have, whatever factors play into there, should be included in our decisions of our mating decisions here. So that's what we're working on. So from now on, you get a little bit of what I think where we need to go here, right? If you can stay with me here. So at the end of the day, we're all talking about cash flow projections, right? We're doing economics, sex semen, beef semen, replacement decisions. It's all about making money. It's all about predicting cash flows into the future. This is a little bit abstract the way I say it, because I'm not just saying how much money do we make this lactation with this cow and this heifer. No, if there's differences, effects on what happens to cows in the next lactation, that needs to be part of our cash flow predictions. If there's differences in culling risk, that needs to be part of our cash flow predictions. I really want to include all future cash flow differences based on the decision that I make today. This type of semen versus that type of semen, for example. So there's lots of attributes that affect these cash flow decisions. And before I go through them, so we're talking not only about the value of the calf when we do this, but cash flow also comes from keeping the cow in the herd or culling the cow, right? Culling the cow or keeping it in the herd. So two things, both of them affect future cash flows. And so there's lots of things that affect these cash flows, right? Lactation number, days of milk, the herd fertility status. Maybe sensors can tell us whether we expect a 70% conception rate or a 30% conception rate. Herd milk production, genetic merit, even on the sires, semen type, breed, prices, sire conception rates, adjustments, risk of abortion, all these things that vary between sires and cows, they affect these future cash flows. And then the mating, and we've seen that example already when we did the genomic mating earlier. So there's ways to do that. You have to sort of get into the modeling. It's not something simple you do on the back of a napkin here. And so when it comes to, I want to spend a little bit of time on the replacement decision, okay, here, right? So, because we're talking about which cows to keep or to replace, because at the end of the day, we said how many heifers do we need to make? Well, that depends on what our replacement rate is. And that's really decided by what should our replacement rate be. So we're going to do for every cow in the herd a cash flow prediction of the cow currently in the herd and a potential challenger, a heifer in the herd. And then we have to take this into the net present value. If I take the difference between a cow in the herd and the potential challenging heifer, I call that, or this is from the literature, I call that the keep value or the retention payoff. All right, and that looks like this. This is real implementation of these principles, again at the U of Dairy unit. This is a plot of keep values for 460 cows. And if the math and the predictions and all these factors that I mentioned are correct, or accurately, they're not going to be 100%, but everything that's included there, these values would be fairly accurate. So anything above 0, most of them, that is the amount of dollars I expect to make by keeping this cow until some optimum time of replacement in the future, compared to selling her now and replacing her today with a heifer. So those animals that are at the bottom, they ought to be my cull candidates. Those that are on the top, no, I don't want to sell them because I incur a big loss, okay? Cash flow predictions forward, okay? So that would drive, if we did this well, this would tell us what the replacement rate on the dairy would be. Because if we culled animals, ideally, that's the formula we would use. If I use these ideas of cash flow predictions into, and I do this a little bit schematically, say on the herd, and I play with my heifer price, okay, and I look at the gray here, okay, then you can see that if my heifer price creeps up and I keep making these ideal culling decisions, I would indeed reduce my replacement rate. So when I have very cheap heifers, and there's lots of stuff in here, right? For example, there are cull prices on cows. When the difference between heifer prices and cull cows are small, I would turn over more cows. When there's a bigger gap between heifer prices and beef and cows on the farm, I would have a lower replacement rate, right? Using optimal decisions here. No matter, although I make optimal decisions and it would drive my replacement rate down some, I'm still not as much profitable because my heifer price increases. I cannot outsmart basically higher heifer prices. Yes, I make better management decisions, but my profitability will still go down some. So now what is the optimal replacement rate here, right? Well, definitely it depends on one factor, on heifer price. And there's lots of things that are affected. One of the questions then is, okay, how robust is sort of a replacement rate, right? If we did 35% replacement rate, but my heifer price changed, for example, am I making a big mistake? If I, for example, I'd have a 35% replacement rate, but I should be at 40% or I should be at 30%. And I won't go into all the preliminary, all the math here. But here I played with the animal cow replacement rate making optimal decisions, but not quite. Optimal would be in this scenario about a 35% replacement rate. Okay, but if I cull cows too fast here, too much, there's some cows that have a positive keep value, but I'm still going to cull them, so I make a mistake. It would decrease my profitability, but not by a whole lot. Not by a whole lot. Or in this scenario here, where I hang on to some cows too long, okay, I have a low replacement rate, maybe because I don't have enough heifers. I'm also going to decrease my profitability, but if you look at the data here, not by a whole lot. So maybe I am not that worried about trying to really fine-tune my replacement rate and therefore how many sex semen breedings we're going to use on the farm. Clearly there's more work necessary here, but conceptually all this stuff makes a lot of sense to me. Well, we can, I already talked about some things that I don't like in our current formula of assigning sex and beef semen inseminations. For example, because it depends on three things. It depends on lactation number, times bred, and genomic net merit. And I want to put everything together. And I can do that if I am good at making future cash flow predictions, right? So there's differences between lactation heifers 1, 2, and 3. Maybe the fertility is slightly different, right? The abortion rates are slightly different. Okay, and so I can do future cash flows for a particular bull, and I compare that to a future cash flow, for example, of the delay decision. Okay, and I call that insemination value. And here I'm interested in this top row here, a future cash flow breeding to a beef sire, or a future cash flow of breeding to a dairy sexed bull here. The delay is still the same here. If I do that, then I get a sex over beef value here. So for every cow and heifer that I can put either sex semen or beef semen in, I now have a dollar value that tells me the importance of putting sex semen in that heifer or cow over beef semen. And if that dollar value is very close, maybe I'm sort of indifferent. If it's a big positive number, I say, no, I better put sex semen in her. Right? And I don't have to worry. It's embedded, the lactation number, the fertility, the genetics, all the milk production. It's all in there if my cash flow prediction is correct there. All right. The problem is with that is I may not get exactly the right number of dairy heifer calves that I get. For example, because I have to assume a certain basic value of dairy heifer calves, and yes, the value of dairy heifer calves is going to depend on the genetics of the mother, for example, right? But if I do that and I have to start with an estimate, I may either make too many dairy heifer calves or not enough dairy heifer calves. So I have to tweak my premium, if you will, or my penalty of the value of a dairy heifer calf. So, all right, and so you're going to get, this is my last slide here. Say, and this is a very small number here, say we need 2 dairy heifer calves per week. Okay, and so if I just say, if I don't play with any bonus on dairy heifer calf, so I'm saying, hey, the basic dairy heifer calf is say worth $500, but if she's genetically better, then she's a little bit worth more. If she's genetically worse than the average, she's worth a little bit less, okay? And so if I were to breed in a certain week this number of cows here, I don't even know, 17 or so, okay? And I have the estimated probability that I actually get semen in those cows. Here is I'm ignoring the keep values here. This is my sex over beef value here. So if it's a negative number, then I'm going to breed her to beef conventional semen in this case. And if it's a positive number, then I'm going to breed her to sexed dairy semen. And with every mating, I also have a probability that we do get a dairy heifer calf on the ground, including, obviously the conception rate and the, abortion risk and so on, all in there. So if I add this up, I would make 2.5, maybe I should have done this on a 1,000 cow dairy. I would make too many dairy heifer calves. So not good, I don't want that. It's the assignment works, but I have too much dairy sex, so I gotta fix that. And I fix that by, I need less dairy sexed semen, and therefore I'm going to put a negative bonus basically on my dairy heifer calves. And that makes relatively the value of a beef crossbred calf to the dairy heifer calf higher. And so I played it. It's an iteration here, and then I get a sex over beef eventually when it calibrates of these values here. And anytime it's negative, again, I use beef conventional semen. If it's a positive number, I use dairy sexed semen. And again, I count for the probability of getting a dairy heifer calf. If I add them all up, I do get to my target of 2 dairy heifer calves. It's maybe a toy example, but I think the principles are very sound. I'm making the exact number of dairy heifer calves that I want, and I'm maximizing my cash flow, future cash flow from my genetics, from my fertility, from my semen prices, from my crossbred calf values, and so on. So I think that's what I had, and I started with this, and I think my time is up. Yeah, we got a few more minutes maybe. So thank you.
Thank you. We have time for a question for Dr. DeVries.
Is everybody scared? I hope you are somewhat excited about my principles there, because I really like this. Yeah, there, okay. It's our new dairy farm, dairy unit manager, so now we're getting real.
Dr. DeVries, if you are to choose, imagine that I don't have all the knowledge of my farm to get the exact number. If I have to choose, I have too many heifers or too little based on our data. In the data that you show, I should have, be careful and have some extra heifers instead of having to choose very little animals. That's your opinion?
Yeah, that's my opinion, because that's what everybody does, and I'm not smarter than everybody else. Now, what percent extra, I don't know. I hear a 5% bonus. So if you say I shoot for 35% replacement rate, and you're going to say, yeah, but a 5% bonus, now I'm having a 40% replacement rate, right? I heard others do 8%. Now, with today's heifer prices and milk prices, I hate to be short on dairy heifers, for sure. Yeah. Secondly, because you were at the U of Dairy unit, you don't think you have this, but you pretty much have most of this, but I haven't told you this yet.
All right. Let's thank Dr. DeVries.
Thank you very much.